Welcome aboard, students. Let's share my screen and let's do money markets today. So, looking at the slides, these are the relevant chapters for money market. And on the right are the relevant chapters for foreign exchange, which comes the following week. So, looking briefly at the curves, you see that we have the money supply and money demand curve. On the left, these have kind of slightly different titles because I'm getting these from online or the book. But we should have a word for money, which they call financial capital here. A word for money is M. I'll look at a letter for money. So you would normally have M on the bottom here. And we don't buy money. You don't go into a bank, say, here's $100, give me $100 in cash for the same currency. That doesn't make any sense. What you do when you go to a bank is you borrow money. So the price, we have price and quantity like before with supply and demand. The price of money is the rate of return, often called interest rate. We use either I or R for the y-axis, R for the rate, the interest rate of money, and on the bottom, M for money supply. So what happens if somebody charges you 100% interest way up here, nobody's going to want it. If somebody charges you like 2% or 1% interest to borrow money, and you need to borrow money, then everybody will want it because it's a really good deal. So we follow the law of demand, which is the lower the price, the more demand there is. Similarly, on supply, we follow the law of supply. If people, savers who put their money in the bank, if they offer you 1%, you're not really going to want to put your extra cash in the bank. You're going to want to buy stock or a mutual fund or a bond fund, something that earns you some money. Not just give the bank all your earnings and let them pay you a tiny bit of interest. Whereas if there's a lot of inflation and banks start charging, providing 25%, 20% interest, that's risk-free money guaranteed by the government. So anything over the stock market, which is average 7 to 15%, anything above that, without any risk from stocks or bonds, is a great deal. So everybody would want to jump in and put their money in the bank. So we follow the law of supply. The higher the price, the more suppliers, the more supply. Okay? Law of demand, law of supply, same exact as in supply and demand we had before. So now, how do we do monetarism, the mechanics of monetarism? How does the Federal Reserve, the US Central Bank, or central banks in other countries like the People's Bank in China, how do they control the money supply? Well, if there's inflation, what they're going to want to do is choke off the money to the banks, and banks will choke off the money to business and consumers, not lend any money. Or if you want to buy a house, they'll lend you the money at a very, very super high rate, and therefore nobody can buy a house unless you're rich. So the Fed, to control inflation, which means more money than goods, so we say too much money chasing too few goods, and so the price of goods is bid up, 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 up. As people compete for that money, they bid the price up if there's not enough money. Inflation is caused by too much money. So according to monetarism, which is trying to do things at the same time, trying to control the money supply, keep it in line with GDP at the same time, keep it in line with GDP and employment. Employment and GDP are basically one-to-one. The more GDP you have, the more work you have, the more workers you need. So to keep the money supply in line with GDP, as Milton Friedman said, they're going to have to use monetary policy. And if there has been inflation already and you're too late, like with Jerome Powell during the 2020 to 2024 administration, Jerome Powell was the head of the Federal Reserve and just let inflation blossom for 3 years, totally not doing his job. If you already have high inflation, it's too late. Then Keynes said, okay, after the accident happens, after the economy is damaged, also you can use monetary policy to control the money supply. In the case of inflation, they both agree we have to cut the money supply. That means supply moves left. It looks like it's moving up, but what's moving up is the interest rate. Okay, remember, price is over here. The only thing that goes up and down on this axis is price. So this is the quantity of money, which we should label M, like in this graph. And you cut the money supply, and then interest rates will go up, which make it harder for businesses to borrow and spend, harder for people to borrow and spend, harder for people to buy homes because interest rates really affect the payment hugely, as we may have seen before. And so they cut the money supply, raise interest rates, and reduces the supply of money, and the economy will slow down. Of course, we'll do the opposite when the economy is in a recession, like the COVID crisis of 2020, 2019, 2020, the financial crisis of 2008, 2009, or the recent inflation that Jerome Powell decided that he would start doing some work and bring down starting in late 2023. Inflation will be answered by cutting the money supply, but a recession, which is slow down the economy, you have to print more money. So leaving 2023 aside, 2008 and 2020 recessions, you go the opposite way, which increases the amount of money, see here to the right, more quantity of money, and lowers interest rates, as you see here, as we move to this right-hand curve. So in a recession, you move back to the right because you're not afraid of inflation because a lot of people are out of work, there's no demand, nobody can afford to buy anything. And then you increase the money supply and push money to the banks. The banks will push money at low rates out to consumers and business, and everything will start to pick up. So that's how monetary policy works with money supply and demand. Going over here, we see the same curves, but the straight up and down curve is from the top macro level, which is, let's say, within a week, the total amount of cash in your pocket, the total amount of money in your bank account is a set amount on a given day at the end of every 2 weeks. And that's what the Federal Reserve uses to count how much money is there in the whole economy. And then they decide how much to give to banks. So the Federal Reserve doesn't respond to interest rates. They set the interest rates. They are the masters of the interest rate. It's savers at the local bank level. It's savers who will save more with higher interest rates. But the Federal Reserve is not an investor. They're trying to keep the economy stable, keep it from going too high or too low under monetarism, under Milton Friedman's theory. So using the quantity theory of money to keep the two numbers, GDP and money supply in balance. So they don't care about the interest rate. They just measure how much money is out there at the moment, and then they will decide, is there inflation? Got to lower the money supply. Is there unemployment and low GDP? Then we have to increase the money supply. They'll base their judgments on inflation and GDP, not on interest rates. So that's why you have straight up and down. This is just how much money is measured for the whole economy by the Fed at the end of a given 1 or 2 week period. Okay, so this is from a very high level, macro country level, how the Federal Reserve sees things. And this is how individual banks operate. Okay. Moving right along, we see that the circular flow of the economy, we had business over here who are debtors. Remember, demand for money is D for debtors. Okay, please remember that for the test. So you had firms providing goods, households buying the goods in the circular flow of the economy. And we can see that by the shape over here. Something is not working right. See that by the circular flow over here. And then on the other hand, we see that in between, now we're going to put the financial system. And firms are debtors. They're borrowing money to produce the goods. Then households are savers. All households are getting all the money from the sales of GDP, remember. They're putting it in the bank or other kinds of financial institutions to save them. So S, supply, money supply, S is for savings. Please remember that. The savers of the households, they put their money in the banks or stock or bond markets. The borrowers, the debtors for demanding money, are the businesses mostly, and other investors like home buyers, residential investment. And so you have a flow the other way of the income, all the saved income from savers goes to the banks or financial markets. They then lend the money to firms, and they use it to make their goods. Once they get their sales money, they're going to repay back the loans, and then savers will always have money. There's always money flowing in for repayments for savers to withdraw money. So that's how this relates to the circular flow of the economy. It's basically the same circular flow, except there's banks in the middle now, and money going back from savers to debtors, back from households to firms, so that they can make the goods in the next business cycle. So that takes care of that. And other sources of funds are debt markets. A debt is a piece of paper that says, I owe you. In other words, I owe you this much money. Lend me some money, and I will pay you some money back. So it's a piece of paper you buy. A debt is a bond, for example, is a form of debt. It's a piece of paper you buy. And when I say you buy that piece of paper, all you're doing is lending money to the banks or other corporations, large corporations. You get back a bond, a piece of paper, which they're promised, hey, I'm going to pay you back. I owe you the money. It's an IOU, please remember. I'm going to pay you back. And why do you do it? Because you're going to earn interest. Okay, that's the point of a bond. For you as an investor, you're going to earn interest. For the firms or companies as debtors, they're going to owe interest, and they're going to use that money in their business. So basically just like a bank loan. Okay, but instead of going through the banks, they directly give you a piece of paper. Now, bonds are usually the millions of dollars. So not many of you will ever be able to buy a bond. I've never been able to afford $1 million bond, nor do I even want one. So, but you can invest in bonds through a bond mutual fund, where a brokerage company makes a fund, and you can invest any amount of money in that fund, and they will go out and buy millions of dollars of bonds, and they will give you, if you put in $250, they'll give you $250 worth of that $1 million bond. They'll basically carve up the bond like chopping up a pizza into very tiny slices and sell those individual slices to people depending on how much they want to pay. So you're not going to buy bonds directly, but a lot of mutual funds will buy bonds. And of course, rich people will buy bonds. The mutual funds will buy bonds and sell you some microscopic tiny share of those millions and millions of dollars of bonds, however much you want. Okay, they'll actually do the bond buying. So bond is a debt for debtors that replaces bank loans, cut out the banks so they can save on the bank fees, don't have to pay the banks any fees. Those are called debt markets. We have stock markets where firms, instead of giving you a paper that says, I owe you, they give you a paper where you can say, I own you. See, I owe you debt, I own you stock, okay? That stock is equity capital. And what it means is that they tell you how many shares you purchased, how many shares you bought of that company. And then you can, as the company becomes more profitable, they can share dividends with you, share part of the profits with you, a percentage of the profits with you. And if they don't share the profits and they reinvest in the firm should gain in sales and gain in value as they become more profitable. And you could sell your stock at a higher price later, assuming the firm is successful. Of course, if the firm is a loser, then you're going to lose money. Very simple. You're an owner. Like you own a car, it's in a crash, you don't have any insurance in the stock market. You have a car, it gets in a car crash, you lose the car, you lose the value. Let's forget about, there's no insurance for stocks, okay? You're taking a risk. So the stock market is another way you can invest, and you can buy individual stocks. That's no problem. They go for tens to, well, some go for pennies actually, but most of them go for tens to hundreds of dollars to thousands of dollars. Not too much above $1,000, rarely. So you could buy stock in most companies, and basically you're giving them money to invest in their business, and then you will be paid back later on. You're just taking the risk along with the company as an owner. Remember, stock is like an I own you. There's a lot of other ways to provide financing in that central bank logo, which really should say financial markets in modern times, like crowdfunding, where you go on a website and you contribute to some kind of fund or other. There's other savings apps that you can do. There's some where you buy something and maybe 1 penny of each purchase goes towards buying some stock you want. So there's many, many ways to participate in financial markets these days, thanks to new technology, but stocks and bonds are the big ones. Now, let's see here. We see here profits. Now, let's go back to the Solow model. Let's remember profits are a percentage of sales revenue, right? So in the Solow model, we had sales revenue up here. The Y curve, we had sales revenue over there, way up high, that was Y. And then a percentage of that was the savings. So we had a similar percentage, which was savings. And savings come from profits, right? So savings come from profits. So they're going to be a little more than a little less than the profits, up to the amount of the profits, right? So savings is going to be about the same shape. It's a percentage of the income, and profits a percentage of the income. So they're both going to have the same shape as the income or sales revenue curve. And the savings, as in the Solow model, is used to reinvent and build up new income later, as you remember. So these are all going to have the same shape. They're all going to be related to each other. So in your final project, you can talk about, if you're looking at your company's profits, you can talk about how it contributes to savings and how that contributes to GDP and the economy as one of your talking points, okay? Depending if the profits are good or bad, you can comment, right? So profits lead to investment, lead to economic growth, lead to more basically revenue and sales. Similar, just the same, it's a mirror reflection of savings, which come from profits, lead to investment, lead to economic growth in a business. So investors buy a firm stocks, the firm invests the money, it sells the product, that's more GDP, it makes the economy grow. Okay, so those are those relationships. And this is how we have monetary policy, again, after the fact, after the economy crashes, as in Keynesian theory, or trying to do it at the same time as in monetarism. Cut the money supply, reduces money to the economy, increases interest rates, discouraging more spending and investment to slow the economy during inflation. Expansionary monetary policy, printing more money, makes the quantity go up on the bottom over here, and makes the interest rates go down, encouraging firms to spend and the people to spend. So let's look at the relationships between bonds, money, and interest rates and GDP. So what happens when there's a higher demand for bonds? Then the price will go up, right? So you'll see the price of bonds goes up and the quantity of bonds goes up if there's a higher demand for bonds, which means the economy is experiencing high demand for goods, right? So businesses have to produce more goods, so they're going to need to borrow more money to produce more goods, right? There's more demand for goods, businesses need more money, they need more debt to produce more goods. That will mean the demand for bonds goes up, and therefore the price of bonds goes up. What that'll do, however, if businesses supply more bonds, then it will make interest rates in reaction. Then interest rates will go down because more supply means lower rates. Again, the supply in this case is within a week, the given amount, the total there is, not how people react to interest rates over the span of a year or something like that, but what happens during a week, right? So businesses see this higher demand, they supply more bonds, which means they borrow more money. And then what's going to happen is there's going to be more money supplied in the system to buy the bonds. Interest rates will go down. And as a result of that, the total demand will go up. It's actually a cycle. So it actually starts over here, then goes to here. And then as there's more money created, businesses get more money from their bonds. People take it out of their savings accounts and give it to business. So it's going into the economy. Then consumers will, businesses will have more money and they'll spend it, and consumers will earn more wages. So total demand will go up. Y equals CIGX, if you remember. Y is AD. Y sub AD is total aggregate demand under Keynes. C is consumption. I is investment. G, government. X is net exports. And so if there's more money going to businesses as I, investment, they'll hire more people. People have more money to spend as C, consumption. And the whole YAD, aggregate demand curve, will move up. Moving right along, this just shows you if there's more supply of money, rates go down, quantity goes up. And finally, here's a game you can play. The address is here. Hopefully it's still out there. These games tend to disappear. Where you can be the head of the Federal Reserve. It used to be Janet Yellen under Bill Clinton. And that's her. And what's going to happen is you can try to keep inflation and unemployment in control with interest rates, which is monetarism. If you practice that, you're going to do fine. Okay, so that's it for what we're going to cover with money. And we will talk about foreign exchange next.